included the
That was
IRS.
super. I'm gonna have you just repeat that last part
Oh,
again. Aloha, everyone. I just decided to record this. Michelle Melendez, Blossom Inner Wellness, and we have John Jay here, coins, ace of coins, and 30 years as an expert at financial risk. And he's sharing an amazing story about debt, which I think everybody wants to, a lot of people want to hear about. And so go ahead and John, share with us that last bit of your story. We are here live on YouTube as well. I think. Sorry, everybody. Oh yeah, okay, we are. We're still here. Go ahead, John.
well, I'm an entrepreneur, and I've been an entrepreneur since I was a child. And in the early 90s, I had lots of credit card debt, and instead of trying to figure out how to pay it, I tried to figure out what would happen if I didn't pay. I wanted to know the worst case scenario, so I wound up in the court, not as a defendant, but as an observer. And I literally sat there when I was in college. I sat there with a notepad and I took notes and I observed how the lawyers got judgment liens against people that didn't pay their credit card debt. And in that research, it was included, tax debt too, because that's really intriguing. That's what, that's a huge topic, right? But what really got my attention was one day I was watching a Citibank attorney go through literally 50 cases within about 15 minutes. Each case was called up, the person didn't show up, and he got default judgments. And the two people that did show up for their cases, begged for mercy. And I thought there's something wrong with that. I mean, what I don't even know what was going on. So I did an investigation. But when I observed some of these attorneys, I thought to myself, some of these guys can't even speak. They're not even articulate. And I'm sure they went to law school and all these things. And I thought, I could pick up a book and read it and figure out what they're doing, and I could probably come up with a defense. And the reason why I thought so is because if people just don't show up and they're going to default on it, imagine if they showed up and said, "No, I don't owe it." That was my thought. Imagine if they did that. So I looked at the rules and I was like, well, what the heck? Oh, they have a burden of proof. What's that? And I did that. I figured it out what you could do in a debt situation. I got all the way to a point where it took me several years, but I figured out how to make a debt collection uncollectible. And that would include the IRS. In fact, the guidance I got was from studying the tax code. And most people want to talk to me at first because of tax situation, which we can talk about that. So I built my practice, and I basically it's a practice. I've been doing it for about just, I guess, 31 years almost now. And when I started, it was because of my own problem. I didn't think it was going to be a profession. I had other ventures going on. And then when I started learning it, it was really fascinating to me. It was empowering to share with somebody. For example, there's a law called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. I didn't know that Ralph Nader got that in the 70s on the books. Nobody was using it. So I started figuring out how to use it. And it was actually causing the banks to stop the collection at that time. Now they don't do that anymore, but back then they weren't ready for someone to come in and say, I don't owe the money, and then they'd have to meet the burden of proof. And same for the IRS. And what I learned over the years, I watched many people lose their property because of the IRS or not paying or whatever. And the common denominator was that they had property. So I thought, how can a person enjoy the benefits of property like cash, money, income, real estate, cars, vehicles, toys, whatever? How could someone enjoy the benefits of those things and not be considered by the IRS to have them or be subject to having been taken by the IRS? So that's what I figured out. There's, look, guys, there's a solution for everything. There is a workaround. And some of my rules are like, always follow the law. Everything I do is going to be legal. So far, I've never had a problem. My clients have never had a problem. I've never had a client come back after 30 years and say, "Hey, remember me? You did this thing and now I got this problem." Never had that. Put out a lot of problems, resolved a lot of problems. And so it's just a lot of fun to tell people things on the phone, solve a problem, and sometimes I could do it in one phone call just because they didn't have an understanding of a thing. And when I told them what it was, they realized, like for example, I've had people call me and say, "My friend said to call you because I think I'm being investigated by the IRS. You know, maybe I'm going to be indicted for," and I'll say, "Well, how do you know?" And they'll say, "Well, I got this letter from them last week." And then I'll immediately say, "No, you're not under investigation." And they say, "Why? How do you know that?" I said, "Because they're communicating with you." It's just something that people don't
Oh, that
know.
makes sense. That
Yeah.
makes sense. I'm gonna put this
As
on.
long as the IRS is talking to you, you're not under criminal investigation. And I've almost had like no clients with that situation. So anyways, so my thinking is I call this the work I do for people is financial risk management. And the way I do it is I change property rights. I change the way you're using property. Like, for example, myself, I don't file tax returns. The reason why I don't is because I don't have a tax liability. Why not? Well, I make a lot of money, but it's actually not my money. I use it to enjoy the things I like in life and to enrich my family and to make other investments, but I do it in a way that doesn't create a taxable gain by IRS standards. I just learned what those were. I don't fight them. I don't hate them. The thing that people don't like about the IRS is not so much the money, is that the IRS is an accounting firm. Okay. If it weren't the IRS, it'd be somebody else. Somebody else has to do the accounting for the United States. They've got over 57,000 cost centers. It's the most efficient tax accounting system in human history. It's one up from the Romans, okay? And yeah, it's abusive, but the thing that people don't like about it is the police power. The accounting service, the IRS, has been given the police power, and part of that involves taking your stuff first before you get to go to court, and put the burden on you to try to work it out later, like go to court or get a hearing or something. So you have to understand how to interact with the IRS. If I want them to make a legal determination, a lot of people complain because they write a letter to the IRS and no one responds. They'll have this 28-page brief and stuff like that. Well, it's because you're not using a form letter that the IRS publishes with instructions on how to ask it to answer you. So it's just like baking a cake. If you don't know how to bake a cake, well, go read the recipe. It's all there. So that's what I've been doing for 30 years.
Oh my gosh, this is incredible. So, I was going to share, and I'm still going to share this video from a former IRS agent. In fact, let me just share that now and see if I can do that. But John, how would people? So you're saying that people, okay, if you just stop paying, that's going to be a violation of your contract to pay, especially if you have a W-4 or W-9 or something like that. Isn't that correct? Because if you're contracted in to pay, like if you're an entrepreneur and you just contract with your customers, which is where I'm headed right now, is what I've been doing. That you don't have to pay taxes because you have the legal right to contract with other people. But if you do sign an agreement to pay, like if you go to an employer and they have you do a W-9, W-4, whatever it is, that's a binding legal contract, isn't that?
It's not about contracts. That's where
Oh,
people are missing it.
okay.
The question is where the liability comes from. How does that arise? And the the word tax, it's something that has to be paid. The question is, do you have a tax liability? Because taxes always have to be paid. It doesn't mean everybody has to pay taxes all the time. It just means that a tax, if there is one, is owed. That's it. So here's where the liability comes from. You guys are this is so simple. It's hard to believe. The tax liability comes from an assessment. There's no other place. You can look at all the laws. It's in the tax code. It's in the case law. Without an assessment, there's no tax liability. And I'll give you a quick example. One of my clients, it's a couple. They were sued twice by the IRS. We beat them both times. The first time, the government tried to get an injunction to require them to appear at an IRS audit. And we had already done it. We already appeared and answered all their questions, and they didn't like my answers because I wrote the answers. And so they went to the government, the court, and they said, hey, these people use the Fifth Amendment. And I told my clients, don't do that. I coached them on everything. I said, don't use the Fifth Amendment at an IRS audit. It doesn't apply. But I took the transcript. I had a court reporter transcribe the entire audit because I knew they would go to the Department of Justice and lie. Well, they forgot to tell the Department of Justice that the people took a transcript. So there was evidence showing that they never used the Fifth Amendment. So when the DOJ sued, we filed a motion to dismiss, and we showed them the transcript we showed it to the judge, and we said, show us where in there that we use the Fifth Amendment. And also, look, here's all the answers we gave it. We answered everything. And so out of embarrassment, they withdrew the case. They dismissed their own case. Then they
Oh
brought
my
another
gosh.
one. And they said my clients owed over the same tax period, over the same set of facts. They said my clients owed $600,000 roughly. Now this took place over a period of about 3 years. So we filed a motion to dismiss. Now that was denied, but we went through what's called discovery. So they have to answer our questions. We have to answer their questions. We did all that. The thing is, the way I ask them questions first, and the idiot who answers them gets to be my witness. So we call a deposition after that. And when I went to call the deposition, I asked in the subpoena, I asked for the assessment certificate or the assessment for each of the allegations in the complaint, each of the allegations that said the assessed tax, the assessed tax. It kept saying that in the complaint. So I said, I want to see the assessment. You use the word, show me. They dismiss the case because they don't have one. So you have to ask the question, well, why is everybody paying all the taxes? Well, this is one example, okay? There was no assessment. Why? Because, first of all, the IRS doesn't do an assessment. You do. So the obligation is not a contract, it's an assessment. And like I said before, the tax must be paid, and there is no tax without an assessment. So where's the assessment coming from? It's filing a tax return.
Oh my goodness.
You create the duty. You create a tax liability that did not exist when you file a tax return. That's it. It's that simple.
So then why is it that some people who stop filing go
Okay.
to jail?
So it comes down to procedure and software. So I've talked to tens of thousands of people. I've worked with tens of thousands of people. And out of all those people, only 7 I confirmed never filed a 1040. And they were in their 30s or whatever, and they're calling me because they're scared. They're thinking, I didn't file. Do I have to file? My friends are saying you have to do it, because that's what happens. Your friends say, you have to do it. We're all doing it. So you think it's required because everybody else thinks it's required. So if you've never filed a 1040 and you get a W-2 because you signed a W-4, right? Or you get a 1099, and that gets sent to the IRS. That tells the IRS, your employer or whoever tells the IRS, you got this much money, okay? Now, if you never filed a tax return, the IRS will have not created what's known as, it's a ledger, but they have not created an individual master file, creating a duty for the government to reconcile income and a tax assessment. So if you've never filed a tax return, but the government gets information that you receive money, it doesn't do anything with it because it can't. There's nothing to do. There's no duty to reconcile just because the government got a 1099 for a person that never filed a return. It doesn't care. It doesn't even know what to do. There's no accounting duty to reconcile. So that's what it comes down to. Did you do something that created a duty for the IRS to reconcile? Meaning do an accounting function, figure out what the net tax is going to be after you consider all the deductions and all these things. So that's an example for a person who never filed. If you filed one 1040 in your life, the IRS is going to expect another 1040 every subsequent year, unless you don't get a W-2 or 1099 or these reports. So that's the difference. If you filed before and then you stop filing, but you're still getting a W-2, for example, they will just hound you forever. They will take all your stuff. They'll garnish your wages. Eventually, they'll take a few years to do that. Sometimes it takes longer than a few years. But this is why I use companies, because a company can have different tax treatments. A first person who files a 1040 has only one tax treatment. It's a 1040 form. And on there, you get one thing. You get whatever the law says as far as, tax rates and all this stuff, deductions and whatnot. But when it comes to a limited liability company, or even a C Corp for that matter, I work with LLCs. Those have different tax treatments. And one of which is, this is the most compelling one. The tax treatment is none, where the money goes to the company and it does not file a tax return. It might get a 1099. It might get 47 1099s. It might make $10 million the previous year. But if it doesn't file a return, the IRS does not care.
Oh my gosh.
It's that simple.
Okay. I'm trying to wrap my head around this. What about the revocation of election of taking yourself out of the system? What about those? Because you're saying that people don't even need that.
That's meaningless. That's just a waste of paper and time and money. That doesn't do anything. When I stopped filing in 93, there was no drama after that. I've never had a problem with the IRS. I've written books and published videos, and for over 30 years, I've gone to audits. I used to fly all over the country and go to people's audits. Sometimes people would be going to jail. I would get them out of jail just because of basic knowledge. It's very, very basic knowledge. It's not complicated. You don't need briefs, and you can't argue with them. You have to recognize when there's a duty to reconcile. And if you can avoid that, or if you've done that, if you've created a duty to reconcile, there's situations where I can't get people out of it. But what I can do, the IRS is actually the friendliest creditor that I've ever seen. And here's why. It's because the IRS bases a debt that you owe it. It bases the debt on your ability to pay. Now think about how important this is. if you're sued by Citibank for a $10,000 credit card debt, it's going to base the collection on the debt, the $10,000. It wants the $10,000. It doesn't care if you can pay or not. Citibank, its attorneys. But when it comes to the government and the IRS, it bases its willingness to collect on your ability to pay. You just have to know how to talk to the IRS. So in most cases where I can't get around the fact that the person did something to create a duty to reconcile, he's got a tax liability. I don't agree with it, maybe, but it's too late. I can't amend the return and get him out of it or whatever. So what I do is I make a deal with the IRS and I try to get my client into a hardship situation and make him uncollectible. Now there's complicated scenario there. It takes a lot of work sometimes, but if I can, I'll get someone into a hardship situation and make them uncollectible, and then we can move on from there. So my purpose is to do the right thing, follow the law, understand who I'm dealing with, the nature of the beast, so to speak, and give my client the most access to his cash flow so we can move him forward. So it might be some person who has a job and he's just, working paycheck to paycheck, and I solve the problem. The IRS is not taking his stuff anymore. Maybe they agree to take $100 a month, right? Or something like that. So then I show them how to create some cash flow. So it's not just about the financial risk, but it's about what I show people is the proper use of allocating capital or creating new cash flow or capital so they can enrich their own lives and improve their net worth. And the way I do it is I do it in a way that doesn't create new tax obligations. In most cases, I can do it that way. So a lot of times the new cash flow, whatever, I create outside of the person's estate, as I call it, their estate, the person. You all talk about the person, the entity, the Sesticate trust, all that stuff. So I create the property rights outside of the person's estate because I don't know what his liability is. Maybe I do know what his liability is. Maybe I know the IRS is taking his stuff. Maybe someday somebody might want his stuff. But what I'm doing is I'm moving out something valuable away from his estate and helping him create wealth or the beginnings of it in a way that no one can ever touch it. It's completely uncollectible just by changing property rights.
Wow. So this can work for any tax structure, or what's
Okay, I can do something very similar for everybody, even if you have an S corp. Let's say you're running a doctor's office and you got an S corp. And the reason why you have an S corp, I mean, that would be a good practice, by the way. Have an S corp, file tax returns because you have employees and you're going to get into the quagmire of state regulations that bring you into the quagmire of federal regulations. Yeah, I can't get around that, and I don't need to. I don't need to talk to the accountant. I don't need to argue with them. I'm not an accountant. I don't even have that expertise. What I simply do is change the way the money is paid to the business. And I do it in a way that gives the business owner the discretion to decide how much of his total business income he's going to be allowed to be subject to taxation. So if a dentist office is making, let's say, $2 million a year, and it only needs $500,000 to operate, he's going to pay the tax on the 500,000, but he's not going to pay the tax on the 1.5 million. And it's going to be a legal way to do it. It's legal to do it that way, because of the way I structure the property rights. And I didn't change his S corp, and I didn't change the way he does his accounting.
So you can do this with any tax structure then?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I just put an overlay on top of that. I keep everything the same and I do an overlay. So another rule that I follow is I make the least changes possible to solve the problem.
That helps because you got to keep it simple.
Yeah, keep it simple, and the least changes keeps it legal. I mean, most people are doing the legal thing. They're just getting, they're getting the wrong end of the deal, so to speak, because the accountant, you got to remember, the accountant is really good at the bean counting. He's really good at knowing, most of them are, if you get the right one, he's going to know the deductions and things of that nature, the tax benefits, and you want a person like that. But he has zero knowledge or comprehension or cognizance of financial risk. So understand who you're working with. An accountant is for accounting. Someone who's a risk manager is about that. My niche is very specific to financial risk, and I don't look at it in terms of like a C corp, like a publicly traded company. I look at it differently than that company, because a company like a mid-level type business, those are not typically my clients. It's the small business owner. I look at financial risk completely different. Nobody does what I do. In fact, a lot of attorneys laugh at me. They think I'm crazy. But I solve the problem, and I usually do it in a couple hours in many cases, and where these guys charge 30, 40, 50, $100,000 to drag them through a bunch of procedures, when I just, in 1 week, done. I just give my client a new way to handle his money.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So I have somebody on the chat and she says, what about property taxes? She's in an HOA.
Okay. So that's slightly different. So property taxes, that system I think is abusive anyways, but property taxes are going to be assessed and collected without judicial review, kind of like the IRS. So there's a lot of theory and there's a lot of people that have had success stories, and I just mentioned that I have to acknowledge I believe that the use of the property determines whether or not the property tax should be assessed. Most people think they have real estate and personal property. They don't understand that there's a distinction between real estate taxable, okay, like your legal description of your property is real estate. It's describing it as real estate, and that's a taxable thing. It's for commerce. It's where there's a public interest, okay, or a state compelling interest. I believe that if you live in a house in the suburbs, for example, that's private. It's not used for commerce, and therefore it's not subject to the property tax. The problem we have now is our system is so embedded and our governments are fully so funded by the collection of property tax. It's kind of hard to get the government to agree that living in your house and using it for nothing other than your living needs and recreation is private. And so the government's going to say, no, it's not private, it's real estate. So they're always going to go forward with this property tax thing. And I know there's some people that have been able to get around that. Here's what I propose. And this came a few years ago when I was trying to help people understand about the fake pandemic. I was saying, look, you're complaining about the schools and you're still sending your children there. Why don't you just stop paying for it and stop sending them there, but stop paying for it? And people say, well, that's my property taxes. If I stop paying, they're going to take my house. And I say, okay, so here's what's going on. The property tax is a lien on your house. There's lots of liens on your house, city code, all these things. But property tax is one of them. So how do you deal with the lien in your house? Well, be specific. The lien is on the title. So you have two aspects to your real estate. Most people don't talk about this. You have the title and then you have possession. There are two legal distinctions. What I do is there's two ways to do this. I can control the possession of the property through an easement. Now, easements, we're all familiar with this. If you drive out, leave your driveway and go on the roadway, that's an easement. And thank you for those. Without those, we can't do things, right? So easements are all around us. We allow easements so we can have cable in our houses and water and electricity. We need easements on the property. So what I do is I create an easement that covers most of the property. I can't do all of it, but most of it in a way that gives you the same uninterrupted use of the property, even if the title is foreclosed upon by whatever. It could be the mortgage, it could be property taxes or whatever. So it's it's almost like surgery. It's not a clean thing to do, but you can do it. Like if you're in foreclosure, you can actually create an easement that preserves your rights to possess the property, even though you'll lose the title. You can get it back later because the next person that gets the title won't be able to use the property because you're using it and he can't encroach upon your easement rights. So regarding property taxes, if you're not going to pay or there's a foreclosure coming, you can retain your use of the property through an easement. That's one aspect of it. Now you mentioned HOA. So HOA is the lowest priority lien. An HOA covenant is a lien. That's the important part of it. It's a lien with foreclosure rights. It's foreclosure rights because you guys give it to your HOA. You don't realize this, but you never amended this out of your covenant, which by the way, you can amend your HOA covenant. You can amend the foreclosure rights. But anyways, the HOA is the last priority lien on your real estate, on your property. So if my HOA lien, my covenant is always going to be there, and let's say the mortgage gets exhausted through a foreclosure or I pay off my mortgage, I exhaust the mortgage lien, that goes away. If I pay my property taxes, that goes away, right? But my HOA covenant, that's not going away.
Yeah.
It's the last lien and it does not get exhausted. So if I have the last word on who has the title to my property, I can use the HOA to take the title back after a foreclosure, after a lien that I don't want has been exhausted on the property. So if I don't pay my mortgage, now you have to work this out, okay? You can't just by yourself. The easements you can do by yourself. HOAs, you got to work it out with the group that runs the HOA, and hopefully your neighbors, you can work it out with them. They can take the property back. They can take the title back because there'll be no one else to make a claim on it once the lien is exhausted. I don't know if that's too much information to answer your question, but it's a little more complicated than, filling out some papers. You have to understand what's going on.
Yeah, I don't do HOA. This is from one of our people in the chat. And again, you guys, if you're in the chat, please let me know of any tax questions. This again is John J. of Ace of Coins. And how long have you been in business helping people with this?
Since 93, since 1993, about 31 years, I guess, 30 years, yeah.
And what has been one of your most challenging situations that you supported your clients with?
The most difficult situation I could find a client in would be where he collected the employment tax from his employee and he didn't pay it. So he's the trustee and now it's a criminal matter. That's a very difficult situation. Those, yeah, you got to pay those. You got to work those out somehow. So I've only had a few of those, but typically the more difficult one is it's going to be an IRS case. Typically, it's going to IRS levy, take all your stuff. And so my challenge is to go in there and prevent the bleeding, so to speak. I go there and I cut them off. I mean, the IRS will be levying somebody and I'll do something right in front of them. I'll just move property around and cut them off. And that brings them to the table. Then they're so nice. They want to talk to you because they can't levy anymore. You know, so the IRS, I guess, really, I'd have to say is one of the more difficult cases. The ones that I have a different way of handling would be Department of Ed, you know, student loans. Those I have different ways of handling based on the person's age. So, but IRS, and you know, I like IRS. I'd much rather have IRS than student loan. And credit card debt, that's a joke. Credit card debt, here's the thing on credit card debt. If you don't know me, you never heard of any of this stuff. If you simply don't pay your credit card debt because you can't, maybe you just can't do it for some reason. And that's the game, by the way. The bankers want you to not be able to pay, just so you know. Usually you can go through 2 cycles in one lifetime to get to that point. But anyways, don't file bankruptcy. Don't offer a payment plan. Don't pay. Let them do what they're going to do, okay? So here's what happens. Let's say you had $100,000 in credit card debt and you did nothing, and you have a job and you get wages, and it's in a state that allows wage garnishment. Your wage garnishment is going to be 25% or less of your net income. Now, how's that for a settlement deal? Why would you try to negotiate a settlement deal when there's already one on the books under the Consumer Credit Protection Act? It's already there. So all these people, all these lawyers and settlement companies are just tricking you. They're deceiving you and they're charging you way too much money when if they just told you what I'm telling you right now, don't pay them and that's your best settlement plan ever. And here's what will happen. Let's say you're in New York. New York happens to be 10%, right? So the first creditor sues you, let's just say. Some of them don't sue you at all. First creditor sues you and then he gets a garnishment, let's say. And that takes effort. It takes a couple of years to get to that point. It's hard. It's a lot of paperwork. But let's say you defaulted on it, made it easy for them. Okay, it still takes them like $10,000 to get there. So they're garnishing your wages, right? So check this out. Let's say you had 15 more unsecured debts, credit cards, and they're all wanting the money and you just can't pay. They got to wait behind the first one that got the garnishment. By the time they get around to garnishing, their debts have expired.
How long does it take to expire?
It could be 7 years. It could be 10 years, 7 to 10 years, somewhere in there. Yeah, but I mean, you're just paying 10%, and in some cases 25% of your net, but no more than that. And then sometimes you're even exempt from the collection based on your income. There's all kinds of ways to solve the problem, but offering a payment, doing a settlement, doing a consolidation, borrowing your way out of it is a bad idea. Bankruptcy is nothing but a payment plan. And what I tell people is bankruptcy is really a brand. It's a brand that you've been sold on because you watch it on the movies, you hear it in stories, and your friends talk about it. File bankruptcy because you can't pay your credit card bills. Well, all you're going to do is get into a different payment plan.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to waive your rights, by the way. If you try to make a settlement to one of your creditors because you think that's going to fix your credit, I can tell you right now it's not. Paying does not fix your credit. Paying does not make the problem go away. It leaves you without your cash, without your power. Because if you had your cash, you could do something with it. You can make more money. Instead of paying $10,000, my rich clients will tell you, if they owe the IRS like $150,000, they're the first ones to say to me, John, I owe the IRS $150,000, but is there some way I can make them wait for that money and get a payment plan? Because I have another deal I can get into, you know, real estate or something like that. They already understand this. And this is what I show my client. I'm like, why pay 10 over here to the IRS when that's an old liability? It's not going to make you happier. Maybe you'll sleep better at night. It's not going to make your net worth is going to go down if you pay an old liability. But if you still owe this over here and you take the cash over here and you buy yourself, let's say, a website business that sells women's exercise attire, that nets you $3,000 a month. Now your net worth goes up because you're
Mhm.
using your capital properly. That's what I show people.
Oh my gosh, this is fantastic. So I have some questions for you. First one is talking, I think, about the HOA. And she says, taking title to lien gets ready for being in that development. How can it not be exhausted then exhausted? I'm not sure about this question.
Okay, so that's my legal strategy she's asking me. So the HOA covenant is a covenant. It's recorded and it applies to the entire neighborhood, and it describes the perimeter of your neighborhood and encompasses all the individual owned lots, the houses.
Mhm.
So that covenant is the lien. Go look at it. It looks like a mortgage. So that is a recorded lien encumbrance on the property. Now, the HOA could assess you a fine or something, right? If you didn't cut the grass or something. And so that's different. And the HOA actually has the right to collect on that individual amount of money and actually foreclose on your property. They can actually take your property from you, take the title in that way. That's what they're used for today. But what you can do is if you're working with the HOA and you have this as part of the plan, you guys work together. And let's say someone goes through a foreclosure on he didn't pay his mortgage, for example. The HOA would still retain that lien. That lien is not changed by the foreclosure. So this title is being transferred during a foreclosure process, but that HOA is still there. So let's say the HOA votes on what's called an impact fee that's equal to the value of your home. Do you think that buyer is going to, first of all, want to buy the house at the auction, at the foreclosure auction? But let's say someone does. Now your HOA comes in there and says, hey, here's your impact fee because you moved into our neighborhood. Welcome to the neighborhood. The impact fee is $250,000. For example, I'm speaking hypothetically. You don't have to do it exactly this way. And of course, many people are not going to pay for the house twice because that's what you're doing. And there's no limits on this, by the way. I've done the research. The HOA can then foreclose on the non-payment of the impact fee and take the property back. So now the HOA has the title. So the question is, did I work out an arrangement so the HOA would just give me my property back? That's where it comes in, where you have to work it out with your neighbors. You can use the HOA for that purpose. It's perfectly legal.
Wow. Yeah. Well, toward the end, you guys, I'm going to share this video from a former IRS agent, but do have another question. How about discharging mortgage payments? Does John speak on that subject?
Well, you don't discharge them. I know there's a lot of language about that. You're not discharging them. Here's what happens. The recorded mortgage is a law. You got to understand, it's not just a contract. It's called a statute staple. Okay, so the mortgage is like a 30-page act of legislation, and you agreed to it. It's an adhesion contract. You can't discharge it. You can't change it. Why you can't change it is because the regulatory environment under which that mortgage was allowed to be recorded and you agreed to is serving investors, and you would change the risk for the investor. So even if the bank wanted to, it couldn't even change the terms of the mortgage. You're stuck with it. So that lien has to be exhausted. There's no such thing as discharging your mortgage. What you can do is offset the payments by buying an asset. That's what I tell people. They come to me and say, I just, inherited money and my friend said I should call you. I was going to pay off my mortgage. And I say, well, why don't you, instead of paying off your mortgage, why don't you take 10% of your inheritance, just 10%, and pay off the payments to your mortgage and keep the mortgage? It's easy to buy an asset that you can manage with a keyboard and make $3,000 a month. It's very easy to do that. And keep your cash. Go buy a laundromat or something.
What do you mean by pay off your payments?
Well, okay, if my payments are $2,000 a month to have my mortgage, I got insurance, taxes, and mortgage. Let's say it's $4,000 a month, whatever. All right, so I've got this liability. It's a liability. I live there. It's not an asset. My house is not my asset. It's somebody else's asset, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go acquire, let's say I'm going to take my $150,000 I was going to use to pay off my mortgage. I'm going to take that money and go buy a laundromat. And it's going to pay me, let's say, $40,000 a year net. I'm going to take that $40,000 a year and I'm going to offset my mortgage payments. You see? I'm offsetting them with an asset. So guess what happens when I pay off my mortgage with an asset and the mortgage is paid off? I didn't have to work for that money, or not really, not wages, like, hourly. I still have the asset, don't I?
Yeah.
So my net worth only goes up. provided the asset works, so that's a different skill. It's a different skill. I mean, the skill most of us learned is how to wait in line, ask for permission, fill out a form, apply for a job, and qualify for the job. That's one sales effort. You got that job, and then you stopped. You didn't continue shopping for the strip mall or the duplex. You didn't continue trying to buy something, right? Sell somebody on the idea of this transaction, right? You stopped. That was enough for you. What I'm saying is you should have more income than you need. Why not? You already know how to get stuff. You already know how to sign contracts.
That's true. Well, this is amazing, you guys. Any other, okay, passive opportunity. We have somebody else. Laundromat is not really passive, any passive opportunities.
You're right, but if you can buy an asset in a way that is currently managed, like for example, let's say I bought the laundromat because the owner is like 78 years old and he's going to retire, and the owner has a manager that has done a good job. He's managed it. The manager hires the people and takes care of things, and every once in a while the owner shows up. Now those deals are not easy to find. So it's a numbers game, right? So if I'm going to buy a laundromat, you bet I'm not going to be there washing clothes. I ain't going to be there. They don't even know who owns the place, right? But you want to buy something that's hopefully already structured in that way so you can do that. So you're just changing places with the owner. Manager stays there and the staff stays there, hopefully, right? If you find an asset that the owner is also showing up every day and cooking the food, if you're savvy enough, you can replace that role with an actual chef, right? And separate that out, the on-site manager from the owner, if you're willing to do that. Otherwise, find one that's already structured that way and buy it, or buy into part of it. Like if I like Panera, if I go to Panera, the one down the street from where I live is a partnership. I bet if I go there with $250,000, the guy would sell me an interest in his company. Why? Why would he sell me an interest in his company? He's making 12%, let's say. Well, if I give him some liquidity so that I can make 12% on my little portion, because maybe his is worth $5 million, I don't know. He can then open another location. Maybe he can pay off some old debt. Yeah. So there's always that deal going on. And so maybe I don't have 250. Maybe I can go find it. You can get money to do things.
So what do you think is happening with the dollar now? Because the dollar, there's a lot of talk and it's kind of a scary time. I know that different countries are getting out of the dollar. What would you say to people about what's happening with the dollar?
Since the Federal Reserve Act, the dollar has been used to steal our labor, to steal our value. So they're just stealing more faster. That's the simple version. They're just stealing more faster. It's the same game, guys. Okay. Nothing's changed. So the question that you should have is, how the heck can I compensate for that? Acquire more assets. That's what you do. And the dollar system will take different shapes. It'll take different forms. As we saw in 1971, right? It went from, the precious metals aspect, and then it morphed into being backed by foreign wars and oil. Okay. But then we get into 2001, the bank robbery, all that stuff, the sabotage, and that the architecture of our monetary system changed a little bit. The tax code changed the dollar a little bit. Now we're getting into technology, military technology, cryptography, and the blockchain. We've been trained to use our phones for everything now. We are now being trained to use our phones, and that will become the new currency. It's already making its way. And if you'll notice the changes, go look at your retail places. You're seeing the grocery stores, the cashiers are training the customer on how to be a cashier. Yeah, and interact with technology. So as far as the future of our dollar, the government still needs to have debt, and they still need to make us pay for it. So that it may answer the question. It's still the same game. The question is, how are they going to make it stick? Well, if you use a blockchain-based type currency, which I think the dollar is headed toward, you can then make the units of currency responsive to certain economic situations or contracts. For example, like Ethereum, I can program my currency to do things, right, or respond in a certain way. Well, I can actually make it to where I can't get the currency, I can't use it unless I give up my biometric data. This is another reason why I'm showing people how to put security agreements on their biometric data against Google and your DMV and the IRS. You can put a lien on all that data they're collecting on you and create a royalty for yourself.
Okay, what? That is amazing.
Yeah, your biometric data is property. You just abandoned it because you didn't know. You could put a lien on it.
We should do a class on how to do that. That's
I have
amazing.
a class on that.
You
Yeah.
do? It's on your
Yes.
page. aceofcoins.com.
Yeah, aceofcoins.com. That I have two different websites now. I'm finishing up right now, so you'll see it eventually. It'll be announced on Ace of Coins, but I have a video series on how to do that, how to do the easements, and some other things.
Wow. Wow, wow. This is incredible. So this is John Jay again with Ace of Coins. The link is going to be in the description. I am live on YouTube, but I am recording this on Zoom, so we're going to upload that. And John, anything else you want to share with this? This is amazing. This is what you've done for people is given them true freedom, because one of the biggest things that people struggle with, and one of the ways that they keep us controlled, is through our money and through people on the hamster wheel, constantly just trying to put food on the table sometimes for their keiki, for their children. So thank you so much for the work you're
I
doing.
like to empower people. So a lot of times I give them language. I give them words. I give them understanding about what's actually going on. It's like my description of our economic system, where I compared it to the plantation and how it morphed into now everyone's on the plantation, you know. So when I do that, people, I just, they just exclaim on the phone. They're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what's happening. And then they need a procedure or a strategy on how to deal with that. So the bottom line is, what I like to try to show people is that you're thinking about your living expenses, and you went and got a job, because most people just get a job and they think the type of job I have is going to make my life better, right? I'm going to make more money at my job or something. And sure, that's probably to some extent true. But what they don't understand is their net worth is flat. And when they go to retire, what are they relying on? Social Security and what? Your 401k and all this stuff. And what really you should be doing, instead of contributing money to these pension funds, is and trying to and focusing on getting a tax break. Instead of doing that, pay the tax on the money, take that money and go acquire your own assets and build your own portfolio. You don't have to be a millionaire by the time you're 40 or 50 or whatever. You can have a small portfolio that pays you $8,000 a month, that you can manage with the help of your children or somebody else. It's not that difficult. So I show people how to think like that. And what I try to show my clients is, they come to me when they're on fire. They have all these problems, right? So I put them out. I just go through that whole process. Whatever that is, I just put that out. Then I show them how to think like this. I want to know how to pay my bills by June, so that any money I make after June is money I don't need now. It's just going to sit there. And then they have the question, what do I do with this cash? I already paid my bills through June. I paid them through December, right? So think like that. How do I pay all my bills through December by June?
I love it. That's fantastic. And I guess you're going to be live. Somebody's like, he's going to be live in Texas.
Yeah, we're going to Dallas. It's Carrollton, but we're going to be in Dallas. We're going to do a presentation out there 2-day, and I'm going to go through this. I'm going to give a class on all the details. I got some new things I'm going to announce out there too.
And it's what are the dates for that?
It's going to be January 19th and January 20th. We're going to announce that on aceofcoins.com.
Okay, so go to aceofcoins.com, everybody. John, thank you so much for your time, and this is quite amazing. And again, aceofcoins.com is in the description. And you guys, thanks so much. Let's do a quick prayer, and then we'll close out this amazing session. Great Spirit, infinite intelligence of all things. Wow, this world is so amazing. Your infinite intelligence is beating each one of our hearts right now. Our hearts are beating with one beat of humanity, the entire planet beating together, unified together under what we all want, which is peace, abundance, love, safety for our children. And it is done. It is here. We just call forth right now harmony and peace for the entire planet, that anybody right now who's feeling afraid, unsure of the future, that they have just this little spark of hope that plants a seed inside of them, that gives them inner strength and the inner knowing that they are totally loved beyond measure, and that everything they need is showing up. We know that the people who need to hear this message, John's beautiful message, Ace of Coins' beautiful message, that they are hearing it, and that they are going forward and stepping forward in courage and inner strength and truth, that they can be free of the enslavement of debt, of the lies that of the fear and the propaganda that keeps so many people under the web of tyranny, that this web is done, is over, and that the light is shining on all of the darkness, on all of the truth, and showing forth, showing people what it is, the true life that we can each have, which is a life of inner strength and peace and harmony and unity, again, for all people around the planet. And we just give so much gratitude right now for John and his businesses and all of the people that he's helped around the world, and his just tenacity and foresight to do his business, the courage that took to step forward, to go into the court system and know that he was speaking truth. And we just give so much gratitude for him. And we know that all is being done in the most divine way, that this is a total game we came to play together. And we know that harmony and peace are surrounding the planet, and it is so done, and it is now. Thank you so much. Aloha, everyone. Much, much aloha. And John, thank you so much for joining me. And this again is going to be on Zoom, so I will upload it to our regular channel. Much
All right, thank you,
aloha, you
Michelle.
guys. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Ending the stream here. And then Zoom.